In this first content lecture, we are going to be looking at a lot of the issues that would refer to a map's metadata, which is the data about the map that tells us a little bit about how that map was produced. In order to understand that information, though, we need to know a little bit about the science of what's called geodesy. Geodesy is the science that helps us to explain and measure and ultimately project and map the planet. The Earth, as we all know, is a sphere, but in reality it's actually a little bit more of an oblate spheroid, which is shown in the upper right-hand corner. It's a little bit of a flattened globe thing. But in reality, it's even lumpier than that, and is referred to as a geoid, which you can see in the lower left-hand corner of the image here. In order to have some sort of mathematical formula that helps us to know what the shape of the planet will be like when we are trying to figure out coordinate systems that can then be projected onto a flat surface, geodesists need to use a formula that is referred to as the reference ellipsoid. The reference ellipsoid is essentially a set of numbers and formulas that help to approximate what the oblate spheroid and geodic nature of the planet is, so that later on, when you start projecting coordinates, it will flatten the Earth in the way that it's supposed to. Hopefully that makes a little bit of a sense, and you might need to cogitate on this one a little bit more to understand it or read some more about it. Geodesy is most important to us as people who are going to map the planet because geodesy helps to describe and actually shape and form what are called the geographic coordinate systems and the datums that are used to actually find locations on the planet. Geographic coordinate systems are systems that allow us to pinpoint a location, to know exactly where it is, north, south, east, west, on the sphere of the planet. The most common forms of geographic coordinate systems are systems of latitude and longitude, which you're probably somewhat familiar with. Lines of latitude show areas north or south on the equator. Lines of latitude show areas, show places that are either to the east or west of an imaginary line that's drawn between the North and the South Pole and bisects some other place, typically Greenwich, England, in the normal latitude and longitude system that has come to be recognized around the world. In addition to knowing where we are with respect to east, west, north, south, we also need to know where we are with respect to the center of the planet and the intersection of a set of geographic coordinate systems and the center of the planet itself, to know how high we are, and not just how high we are, but how the map will sort of fit onto this geoidal planet again. This is done through something that's called a datum. There are universal datums that try to approximate the center of the planet for the entire world. The most common of these is something called WGS 84, the World Geographic System 1984. But then there are also lots of regional datums as well that attempt to do this a little bit more accurately for one particular region of the world or another. For example, in the United States, there are a series of regional datums that have been established. The first one that was created, that was accepted sort of throughout North America, was called the North America Datum of 1927. That's been updated significantly, although now most of the time we use WGS 84 in mapping in North America. Once we know what the geographic coordinate system is that we're working with, and once we know what datum we're working with, we can start to project the spheroidal planet onto flat sheets of paper. Of course, they're not really sheets of paper much anymore. They're mostly computer screens, and we don't project them in the way we used to, which was to literally like wrap a sheet of vellum around a globe and project light through it. This is all done mathematically now in formulas that is handled by geographic information systems. There are a bunch of really important projections that are used, but more important right now than the actual projections, and you can see some images of projections right there. The Mercator projector is shown in the upper left-hand corner. There's something called a polar planar projection shown in the upper right-hand corner. And then there are conical projections, which are particularly good to show North America, I should say, shown in the lower left-hand corner. There are also projected coordinate systems, which means you produce a map and then you project these latitude and longitude onto a coordinate system that works within a particular part of the world. The two most important projected coordinate systems are something that's used in something known as UTM, Universe Transverse Mercator, and another system used called the State Plane System. So here are examples of how projections can look very different based on what happens to the geographic coordinate system when they're actually manipulated within the coordinate. The upper left-hand corner shows that Mercator projection and that cylindrical projection. Then the upper right-hand corner shows the conic projection using a projection which I believe is the Albers conic projection. The Peters projection is shown on the bottom, which is an attempt to take the Mercator projection and alter it, especially when we are closer to the poles, to try to make the shape of things, the size of things more accurate at the expense of the shape being distorted. So this is one of the big problems that's associated with projections that you should be familiar with it, and that is that once you take the rounded surface of the globe and project it onto a flat surface, you can't both keep shapes right and also keep sizes right. There's going to be distortion that takes place. In the Mercator projection, upper left-hand corner, shapes tend to be preserved very well, but the areas become quite distorted. Alaska is not that huge. So the Peters projection down below tries to change the size of Alaska and distort its shape at the same time to make it look the right size. The conic projection in the upper right-hand corner actually does a pretty good job of both those for North America. The problem is that if we extend it to other parts of the world, it will get really wonky and look even worse than these other projections that we have here. One of the most common ways to make projections that will be used for the types of maps that we will be creating, especially very small maps that show detailed areas, is using something called the Universe Transverse Mercator system, which essentially projects using a cylindrical projection along a line that, instead of running along the equator as the typical Mercator projection does, runs along a particular meridian. And when that happens, what you do is you essentially create strips of maps that can then be reprojected. The map in the upper right-hand corner shows the globe in a series of strips. Zone number 28 is shown on the right, and it does show that there's distortion in this strip, but it's a distortion that generally does not make a huge matter of importance, is not a huge matter of importance, especially in the mid-latitude areas when we're mapping something. But one of the things that's really important about the UTM is that meridian that is in the middle is essentially a baseline, and then the coordinates are all measurements of meters that are either to the east or west of those or north of the equator. South Central Alaska, by the way, is in Zone 6 of the UTM system. Parts of Alaska are in other zones. The State Plane system uses the same sort of principle It again uses UTM, Universe Transverse Mercator, but they're very specific to the state with their own meridians. And so Alaska, for example, gets many more zones in it than it does under UTM. And so sometimes these are used again for mapping small areas where you want to have very accurate representation of what the look of the land is like. Municipalities and the state of Alaska often use the Alaska State Plane System to project some data that they collect and then the maps that they make as well. You can see that their state plane systems for the lower 48 as well. So when we throw this all together, there are all sorts of different ways to locate places, and this may show up in some of the maps that you're using. Using the traditional latitude and longitude geographic coordinate system, my office is located in 61 degrees, 11 minutes, 22.24 seconds north, 149 degrees, 50 minutes, 1.94 seconds west. This can also be expressed in a decimal form, as you can see in the second line there. Once we start projecting outside of a geographic coordinate system into a projected coordinate system, things are often shown in feet or meters. My office location using the UTM system is in zone 6 north, and then you can see the meters either north of the equator or east of the central meridian that is used. That's not exactly accurate, because the central meridian of these UTMs is all set at 500,000 meters. And so this would actually be 500,000 minus 347,674.89 meters to the east of that, to find out how far away you are from that central meridian. The same thing works for the Alaska State Plane System. It works in the same way. Oftentimes the State Plane System uses US feet, though, which makes it not particularly useful outside of the United States. Of course, there are other ways to locate things too, and an emergent one is Google codes now. There are codes to locate places for all around the world. Here's the code again for my office. And then one of my personal favorites, and you can look this up if you want to, is something called What 3 Words. And it essentially uses 3 words to help you find the location of any block of land in the planet that I think is 10 meters squared. And my office is located at the 3 words, Save Cult Hugs. In addition to having to know the coordinate system of a map, you should also be somewhat familiar with its scale as well. Scale can be shown graphically, as we see in the upper image here, where there's a little bar that shows us how many inches equal a mile or a kilometer or whatever, but can also be shown as a ratio. A very common ratio for topographic maps is 1 to 24,000, or in Alaska 1 to 25,000. This map, which has a small number, would be called a large scale map, and a large number, like this one in the United States, which is about 1 to 8.5 million, is a small scale map. So all of these things, like maybe not scale, but at least the projected coordinate system and the type of projection and the ellipsoid, are going to show up in your map's metadata. And in the first assignment that you are doing, the first project that you're doing, you're going to be looking at metadata like this, something like this, that is going to show you, if you work your way down this, that the projected coordinate system for this particular map is UTM Zone 6 North, using the North America datum of 1983. It also tells you what the spheroid is, and it tells you the type of projection, and also some other information about the parameters involved in the UTM projection itself. So it's important to understand some of this geodetic information, not because you're going to have to use it heavily in this course, but you should know at least a little bit about the background of it so you're familiar with this metadata. Should you have to discuss it or understand what some of the problems are associated with your map and its projection at some point later as you start to manipulate data more specifically that might be impacted by these issues.